Welcome to the Subjective Professor podcast, where we reject coercion and hypocrisy. It's Thursday, July 17th, 2025, episode 440, and we're going to talk about good or bad guys, good guys and bad guys. So, someone said to me once on social media, we are the good guys, right? And I was arguing and disagreeing with him about something with regards, I think, to the war in Ukraine. And he basically said, no, we're the good guys. Like, okay. And so people have tried to convince me to support the Ukrainian war or the Ukrainian side of the war, but they just didn't and could not understand that I was just simply pro-peace. And it seemed to say, well, what's more important than peace is being on the right side. In which case, I'll just say, you're on the wrong side. And for most of them, it seems like the only side that they could see was either Ukrainian or Russian. And so being on the good side or the correct side justifies all of the violence and the evil of war, which is absolutely absurd. This also implies that Putin is bad, but this is the height of racialization if there ever was one. In other words, to basically say, we can kill all these Russians, we can kill all these Ukrainians because Putin is bad, it's just a ludicrous argument. The same goes with Gaza and Israel, especially like Christian Zionists making those ridiculous arguments saying, yeah, it's okay to kill Christians because we have to help Israel. It doesn't make any sense at all to me. So, uh, are we going to say that everybody in Russia is evil? Everybody in Ukraine is good, right? Especially the Nazis who are in Ukraine, right? I don't know. I have a problem with that. And I just, next time someone tries to do that, I will call them out. I did it before, but I'm going to do it more often where I called someone out to say, hey, so you're supporting Nazis, where's the good in that? I thought Nazis were really bad. You were calling Trump a Nazi after all. After all, so it's kind of ridiculous, right? So everyone in Ukraine is good, including the anti-war activists over there, or maybe the anti-war activists in Russia. They're all evil. You know, are you going to include all of the politicians that you dislike into one or the other camp? It's just really an asinine attitude. It erases and hides so much, including consequences, in the name of a weak and naive intention. Okay, so this is basically that kind of argument. We're the good guys. It's so childish, and it flattens out and simplifies to the point of absurdity and meaningless the argument that really needs to take place. Okay, so back in the day, and I mean our own personal childhood, you might be naive to say something like, we're the good guys, or we're going to play good guys and bad guys, cops and robbers, cowboys and Indians, whatever. So they're the bad guys, and we're the good guys. Who wants to play the bad guys? Who wants to play the good? Back in the day as a child, you might, uh, have this perception, or you might have played this way, and then you are governed by your character's moral position. You're the good guys, so you don't abuse people. You're the good guys, so you treat your prisoners well. You're the good guys, so you feed your prisoners, blah, blah, blah. And if you're bad, then you're going to do all of the things that are cruel and heinous, evil, right? And so people who grew up with this idea of good and bad are often shocked when they hear war stories of atrocities being committed by the side that they had supported, right? Because they forget that life is much more complicated. And then war, I've talked about this before. I would imagine that in order to take someone else's life, you have to put yourself in a certain mental attitude. And once you're in that zone, do you really distinguish, um, you know, who you're shooting, right? Oh, this is a child. I shouldn't shoot this child. You're already crossed that line of taking someone else's life. And to be able to blind yourself to the moral implications or the consequences of taking someone else's life, you're there already. So it seems to me that it's not that big of a step further to start taking the lives of people who are not even really combatants. So, but people live with this naive perception of the world of good and bad, right and wrong. But what is moral? What is good? What is bad? And how are these concepts defined? And we have to always come back to the subjective theory of value. What is good, what is moral depends on your subjectivity. I am sure people who live in Russia, knowing what the West is doing, will see themselves as being on the good side, right? So now we're back to democracy, right? Okay, how many people think that Russia is good? How many people think that America is good? It's a stupid way of trying to determine good guys and bad guys, right? It's very subjective, in other words, what I'm trying to say. And it gets subjective to the level of the individual. If you were a Ukrainian soldier kidnapped off the streets of the Ukraine, sent to the front lines, and now you're about to die, I mean, where's the good in that? So are we going to say that one person's opinion from a certain country is the opinion of everybody else who lives in that country? That's weird, right? Let's just say your least favorite political opposition person is now in charge of your life, right? So they control everything that you do and say all day long. So what? That person represents you? I don't think so. We have to always remind ourselves and remember that it is nearly impossible, if not impossible, to have a consensus about everything, particularly about something so destructive and evil as war itself. What if you were one of those people who died, who lost a family member? Like if you were given a choice, like of having a present or a future with that family member or without that family member, would you have done things differently? If you start with the narrative of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, right, without discussing why, would you change your mind? What if you start with the coup in 2014 by the United States, right, destabilizing Ukraine? Uh, would you change your mind? What if you start a discussion with the fall of the Soviet Union in 1991 and the promises made to the Soviet Union or Russia that NATO would not expand? I mean, you could go on depending on how you're going to create your narrative, your perception, and how you understand things. Would you change your mind? Would you, uh, have a different opinion? Would you soften the opinion that you had? Right. And so basically, everyone has a different perspective based on the knowledge that they have, right? Our knowledge determines our subjectivity, right? Mentally, anyway. Right? And so if your knowledge base changes, then would not your opinions change as well? Unless you're holding on to some moral position, which means that logic, information, facts, perspective mean nothing, right? They have no meaning any longer, so you can ignore them. So, uh, if also, if you are right about one thing, are you right about everything? If you like someone or you voted for someone, do you have to agree with everything that person says and does? You might like Trump for one thing, uh, and perhaps you feel like in order to have that one thing, you have to agree with everything else, which is absurd, right? How is it, if that was the case, then anyone who gets married, you would never have an argument, right? Because you're always agreeing with each other, which obviously doesn't work. But in fantasy land of politics, apparently it does. And it's as if, if this politician doesn't do it, no one can, right? If we uh, allow our support to erode, then no one will be able to do the job that we think this person is failing to do, So it's just kind of a very weird logic that goes on with politics. And this is how politicians, leaders drift into dictatorships, right? Because they demand and they often get absolute support from their followers. They feel like they can do anything that they want, which is what Trump's attitude seems more and more to be. I know some people want to allow for some kind of 7D chess, right? 5D chess or something. Like I even entertain that idea that maybe Trump was, deliberately, misleading people in order to do something. But that can't be the case any longer, right? I don't believe it. I think he accidentally does certain things in a way that it works out positively, but otherwise, yeah, I don't believe he's playing 5D chess or even 3D chess for that matter. Uh, but because those people who actually want to continue to support him and think that in order to support him, you have to agree with every boneheaded, idiotic thing that they say and do, well, that's how you have dictatorships. Generalizations like, racializations like we are the good guys, self-identifying as the good guys, it enables you to ignore a lot of the problems, right, that also exist. Like, well, we're the good guys, so sometimes you have to murder your prisoners. We're the good guys, so sometimes we have to murder children. And when we do, since we're the good guys, then they must have deserved to be murdered, right? So it's this weird thing that happens when you self-identify and racialize yourself as part of the good guys. Also, by simply saying something like, we're the good guys, it uh, allows or enables people to ignore the interests of the special sub-interests that people have or that governments represent, like corporations, big businesses. Larry Johnson on his website, Sonar 21, he published an article that is titled Russia Goes on the Offensive Against U.S. Investors in an Odessa Port. Odessa is a city, and obviously, if it's a port city, then there are lots of different warehouses and whatnot. There's a lot of commerce that is happening there, and U.S. owned assets in Odessa were bombed by Russia. And so it's interesting. If you read that article, you'll see that some of the investors are in charge of pension plans here in the United States. And so you can kind of imagine that because treasury bills are no longer generating the kind of interest that you need, or they're becoming uncertain and unreliable, you need to branch out into other kinds of investing, real estate, for example. But how about real estate in Odessa? Yeah, that looked like it was going to be a great investment. Oh, but now there's a war. And so now you have this situation where in order to protect the pension plans of people in the Midwest, you have to prosecute this war. You have to continue to participate in this war. But instead of just basically laying it all out, saying, well, we're sending more weapons to Ukraine because the pension funds in Chicago are under threat, you know, and which will lead to another discussion like, why do the pension plans here in Chicago or in Illinois, the Midwest, how is it related to the war in Ukraine? This is not possible, but in fact, yes. And so to avoid even more awkward questions, you're just going to sort of simplify and say, well, we're the good guys. And that's just the one business interest, right? If you have been following at least some of the news coming out of Ukraine, you know that there were a lot of research labs like Wuhan, China. There were like 12 of them at least in the Ukraine, experiments which were illegal here. But because Ukraine is not the United States, you can offshore, right, export your illegal, dangerous experiments to another country where there's little regulation. So now it's perfectly illegal to do it over there, what otherwise would be considered immoral and illegal here in the United States. So uh, why not just simply say, well, we got to protect these research labs, which are doing all of this illegal research that, we can't do it here in the United States, so we got to do it over there. We have to protect those investments. Or maybe we have to protect the mining investments or the agricultural investments or the military investments, right? But they're not going to say that. They're just going to simply say, we're the good guys, right? It also ignores the fact that people who say that stuff to me ignore the fact that they hate Trump about pretty much everything except the war in Ukraine, right? So, in other words, they're bashing Trump, except they will remain silent when it comes to wars that they support. Same thing with Biden when Biden was president, right? And so, when your pet issue arises, you're going to be silent in your critique because you don't want to undermine or threaten uh, stuff that you like that person is doing, right? So if I say, oh, this person got it wrong on this issue, then maybe they got it wrong on all the other issues, right? And so people don't like to leave themselves vulnerable that way, particularly people on the extreme left and right, which is why they never apologize. They never admit that they were wrong. They just pretend it never happened. I don't know. You must know people like that. I know a lot of people like that. All these people who came at me, none of them apologized for getting it all wrong. I think for in some weird way, they rationalized and believed that it was all correct. Uh, but if you so flip it the other way, if you're going to say, "Oh, I hate Trump so much," but then he does something that you like, should that not soften your critique of him? But no, no, that's not what a lot of people will do, right? Because admission of being wrong makes you weak, which means you're going to lose more arguments in the future. And I think I've said this before. And so when I would criticize Trump, people would say, aha, see? And I was like, oh, okay. So you're willing to admit that you've been wrong for all of these years too when you supported Biden. And they never reply, right? And that's basically the thing. The admitting that they were wrong is like kryptonite to these people, right? Because they want to keep pretending that they were always right to get you to do the things that they want you to do. Uh, I wonder if Americans have heard Putin speak. Putin seems to be the rational one. He is protecting the interests of the Russian people in the same way we would expect the president of the United States to represent the people, not the corporations, the people of the United States. So, I mean, if you track the rise of Putin, yeah, sure, he was in the KGB or whatever you want to call it, the secret police, but it was in the face of Western corruption, right? What if all of the people that Putin executed or the people he went after, I know very little about Putin, but I did know that he's in the KGB and that he probably did a lot of really shady things, and now he's the president. And so people are saying, oh, he's a murderer. Oh, he's a bad guy because of what he did when he was in the KGB. Well, let's take a step back. Who did you hear that from? Well, obviously, it's from people who are anti Putin, pro West. But what if the rise of Putin was in the face of Western corruption? That is to say, with the fall of the Soviet Union, a lot of Westerners went into Russia to plunder Russia, right? Just the way American business people are. They want to have one-sided trade agreements so they can, basically take all of the resources of Russia and impoverish the country, right? That you can see this happening all over Africa, right? And so the Russians and Putin basically said, "No, no, we're not going to do this. This is my country, right? If we were to pretend to be Putin, this is my country. I am going to do something about this." And so all of the people that he went after, if he did execute people, that they were people similar to people on the Epstein list. Right. And this is a hypothetical, just like I guess the Epstein list is now hypothetical, right? But let's just pretend there was such a list. And Putin executed all the sickos, all the people who are engaging in trafficking, right? Because that kind of wealth and corruption breeds a corrupt mind, and they do weird things like traffic children for sex, right? So, what if the people that Putin executed were people on a Russian version of an Epstein list, right? But they were Americans or they were Europeans. And so now we in the West, we get to say, oh, look at what Putin did. He murdered all these people who we liked. Oh, but these were sickos. These were people who are disgusting. And he was doing it to rescue his country. Like, this is a whole hypothetical, but what if, right? What if? And so all of a sudden you get these people who were pedophiles and, just disgusting people. And all of a sudden now they're victims and Putin is the bad guy. Okay. Right. You see how that is done? Totally plausible. And given the amount of support that Putin is getting from the Russian people, right, that it seems to me more plausible, more likely. How about Iran? The Ayatollah of Iran, he looks rational compared to our own leadership, right? I mean, they could have continued to bomb Israel off the map, but they agreed to the fake retaliation in exchange for a ceasefire, right? They could easily have wiped out Israel, right? But maybe they refrained because of Israel's nukes, right? Which is even more the reason why you want to develop nukes in your own country. I'm talking about Iran. And in this way, it's the West which is actually acting irrationally, right? So keep prosecuting war, even though we lost to the Yemenis, the Houthis in Yemen, right? But let's have another war, even though we couldn't even defeat them. Sure, let's keep exporting our weapons, drain all of our supplies in a war that we're going to lose so that we have nothing. Uh, or entertain the possibility of using nuclear weapons. I mean, that by itself should disqualify anyone from political office is to entertain the idea of using nuclear weapons. That's just so stupid. And but Iran is the one that is acting rationally, and it's people in the West, particularly people associated with the military, who are using these irrational options. It's so crazy. Now, you might want to say that Putin and the Ayatollah are authoritarians. Oh, they're so bad because they don't allow for freedom. Yeah, like this government does, right? So in Europe, they're arresting people for social media posts, right? In America, people are getting arrested for, getting in the way of other people. There's no justice here. That's authoritarianism straight up. There's no freedom of speech here any longer, right? I think a case could be made that I lost my job because of freedom of speech issues, right? So one cannot use the brutal authoritarian argument because the United States and many European countries are also extremely authoritarian. I mean, which side is talking about using nuclear weapons? Okay, that's the insane side. That is the side that has lost their minds. Okay, and that would be in the West, including the United States. Now, citizens in the United States are being used, right? Like I said, I really I don't know too much about Russia and China, and quite frankly, it doesn't matter what I think about them. What I care about is the United States. We have to go back to doing it the right way, disconnect from the rest of the world, the insanity of the rest of the world, particularly Israel and places like that, right, who have an unrealistic agenda and are willing to sacrifice their own people to follow and pursue a greater agenda. We have to move in the direction of freedom. right? Make people pay for their choices. Look, if Israel wanted to go to war and all of their citizens are in support of that, let them go ahead and then suffer the consequences. I saw that there was the part of the BRICS conference, they put together, you know, an action, a plan of action to start punishing Israel for what it's doing, that they cannot no longer stand by and watch the genocide that's happening in Gaza. And that's what I'm talking about, right? If the United States wasn't there to supply Israel everything that it wanted, you would have a completely different present, right? Our news cycle would be completely different. So you make people and countries and their governments pay for their choices. If it means the destruction of your country, then so be it. And in fact, the United States, that's what we are looking at, the destruction of this country because of the flawed leadership that we have voted into office, right? And are unable to punish as a result of all of their lying and corruption. um, People would be forced to have to stay in school or be unemployed, right? Because there wouldn't be any welfare, right? So in other words, the more freedom you have, the less problem we have in society because everyone then would be forced to reckon with the consequences of their own choices. But when a government decides something, none of us have choice. We don't have a choice, right? Even if you voted for the person who is making bad choices, you voted for that person, and that person now has decided that all of us have to do this or that. It reminds me of this whole legislation based on intent, not result. Thomas Sowell talks about this a lot, that laws should be judged based on their results, not by their intent. Like, oh, I wanted to help poor people, but oh my goodness, look, I made things worse. Yeah, judge legislation based on the result, not the intent. And it's sort of like saying, well, he meant well, that politician I voted for meant well. Well, judge them by the results of their policies, not by what they said they were going to do. And that's what I do, right? I voted for Trump. I've said this before. I voted for Trump because he said he was anti-war, he was going to end the war. And now that he is not, then he lost my support, right? That was the only reason why I was even interested in that election, considering also that, Harris and Biden were infinitely worse. But moral positions on war and all of these other things should not be based on intent. Well, we're the good guys, and so what we do is good, or we're the good guys, so we have to support the good side. That's the intent, but what's the result, right? A million dead Ukrainians. I mean, how is that a good thing in any stretch of the imagination? All those Russian dead too. I don't know. It's just such a weak position to hold. What if we made the same arguments? Oh, I didn't mean to burn your house down. I was just having a little fire pit. Oh, I didn't mean to kill half your family, because I was just trying to make a left turn. That all of these things, if any of us did anything close or remotely similar to what government does, we'd be in jail. They throw away the key. But no, and when it comes to government, we just say, oh, no, no, they intended that it was good, or we're the good guys, these stupid, silly arguments. So the good side or the good guys or the good people are those who allow for freedom with consequences. Those are the good people. And the bad people are those who would force you into something, into doing something, right? Or force you into a situation and then turn around and make you pay for it, right? Like trade policies, Trump, like this is where we're going to do it, right? And then it's so expensive. We all suffer. And he's like, well, that's not what I intended, but you guys all have to pay for my mistakes. Okay. So you don't want, they want you to focus on emotional goals. That is, goals that are not based in reality. But we want to focus on the hard realities of consequences, right? And there are many, many battles, excuse me, that need to be fought. There are so many different aspects of life, so many different things happening and I had that podcast episode not that long ago where I wanted everyone to look at the big picture kind of situation, right? What is the big picture in a crazy world? Because that's what's happening, that so many things are happening all at once. It's so confusing. Which way do we go, right? So you want to focus on a good principle, have a good principle. And that's when you can begin to figure out what is, in fact, better or worse. You know, there's so many battles that are being fought and raised and shoved in your face. And all of the true meanings or the better meanings of all of these events are hidden by money printing, right? It's all of this liquidity that is hiding the true nature of many of the things that we're seeing in life, right? It's like, excuse me, at high tide, you don't know who's swimming naked. And when the water goes out, that's bankruptcy. You'll know who is swimming naked. So we got to end the Fed, roll back all of the government regulations, and expose who have been swimming naked, right? Because everything that they've said, all of their so-called morality, we're the good guys, you know, was all a lie. They were naked, right? And so we reveal what is true, what is the true cost of our choices, and then we can go from there, right? Where we end up, like I said, where we end up, no one can really predict, right? But all of us then are going to move in that direction as free people. And that's what we need. So rather than drift into this argument of who are the good guys, who are the bad guys, Putin is bad, we're the good guys, you know, to me is very silly, right? It's a misdirection. It ignores so much, and even ignores our own stupidity. So it's always freedom. We always come back to freedom. And once again, we have in this episode, and I will talk to you next time.